Zoroark has one of the coolest abilities in Pokemon history. Illusion lets it disguise itself as another Pokemon, which can lead to all sorts of new mind games. Unfortunately, it was released at the worst possible time, so it didn't wind up being nearly as broken as people thought it would be. Let's give this guy a look, shall we? Illusion disguises Zoroark as another Pokemon in the party until it gets hit by an attacking move. The disguise still has all of Zoroark's moves, stats, and its pure dark typing though. It just looks like a different Pokemon. So I could bring in Zoroark disguised as Gastrodon, but then you'd realize something is up when Gastrodon outspeeds you and uses Flamethrower. Gastrodon normally can't learn that move. So suddenly you realize your grass type isn't safe. Then Gastrodon proceeds to take neutral damage from your Power Whip, and surprise, it was Zoroark all along. In Pokemon Black and White, Anne uses a Zoroark that can disguise as a Klang in your final battle against him. Not the greatest combination, because both Pokemon are steamrolled by a fighting type move, but hey, still cool to see the ability in action. In the early days of Pokemon, your opponent's team was hidden at the start of the battle. Each player would have one lead Pokemon that would start every battle, and the other 5 remained a mystery till they came in for the first time. This is one environment Zoroark would absolutely thrive in. At any point, a new Pokemon could switch into battle and turn out to be a Zoroark. You go for a Psychic move thinking it's a Breloom in front of you, and surprise, it's immune. It was Zoroark all along. But Zoroark was added to the game in Generation 5, the same gen where Team Preview was introduced. Now your opponent saw all 6 Pokemon on your team at the start of the battle, and you both picked your lead Pokemon with that information in mind. Team Preview meant you didn't have to have a dedicated lead, and you could start the battle with any Pokemon you wanted, based on whatever made the most sense against any particular opposing team. But on the flip side, that made Zoroark less viable, because your opponent will always see it coming. Without Team Preview, Zoroark's existence in Pokemon would have fundamentally changed how the game is played, because you would always have to remember that any Pokemon in front of you could be a Zoroark. Even if your opponent didn't have one, you'd still have to proceed with caution, because it could pop up at any time, at least until you've hit every Pokemon in their party at least once. But that's not the world we live in. If Zoroark appears in Team Preview, you know what to watch out for. If it doesn't, you can play the battle as normal. Not only does your opponent know when to watch out for a Zoroark, but Illusion also has another limitation. You can only disguise yourself as the last Pokemon in your party. So that restricted the amount of nonsense Zoroark could pull per game. And on top of that, there are a lot of ways for your opponent to tell when you're using an illusion, even if Zoroark hasn't actually revealed itself yet. If you disguise yourself as a flying type and you take damage from spikes, your opponent will know it's Zoroark. If you disguise as a Volcarona and take neutral damage from Stealth Rock, your opponent will know it's Zoroark. And there are all sorts of other tells that can tip your opponent off. The illusion only breaks when you're hit by an attacking move, but thanks to weather and entry hazards, you can sometimes tell when a phony's on the field, even before Zoroark reveals itself. Zoroark's Pokedex entries talk about how easily it can fool people with its illusions, but competitive players know better. Ditto is a bad Pokemon in competitive play, but it can also smell Zoroark from a mile away. Its ability Imposter doesn't activate if the Pokemon in front of them is an illusion, and it can't turn into the illusion by using the move Transform either. So if you bring in a Ditto and it stays a Ditto, you know it's Zoroark in front of you. Don't get me wrong, Zoroark is a pretty good Pokemon, but Illusion wasn't the game changer it could have been. It's got good offensive stats and a solid special move pool. It can choose between moves like Dark Pulse, Night Daze, Flamethrower, Sludge Bomb, Focus Blast, Extra Sensory, and even Trick, to give your opponents an item they don't want. Zoroark also has a decent attack stat, so in some later generations it'll use some physical moves as well. Some of its options include Knockoff, U-Turn, and Low Kick. Also Bounce and Dig, but who cares? Illusion can also work decently with the right teammates. Some partners Zoroark uses in Gen 5 include Quillfish and Heracross. Zoroark doesn't play anything like these Pokemon, and they all take the same amount of damage from hazards and weather. That means it's harder for your opponent to tell when Zoroark is actually on the field. Zoroark, Heracross, and Quillfish have completely different type matchups, so a move that's super effective against Heracross won't be against Zoroark. So your opponent has to play a potentially deadly guessing game in that scenario. Besides the limited applications of Illusion, Zoroark is as frail as the day is long. 60 HP, defense, and special defense means it'll roll over and die against a lot of attacks. But it's decently fast, and it can hold a damage boosting item like Choice Specs, so it can do some big damage and promptly perish when the job is done. So it was pretty alright in competitive singles. Not stellar or anything, but it could make things happen every once in a while. It had a niche in the underused tier in Gen 5, the second highest standard tier, sitting below overused. Zoroark wasn't too common in VGC doubles formats, but it was able to play some mind games without ever appearing in a battle. In VGC, you bring a team of 6 Pokemon, then you pick 4 of them for each battle. So even if you didn't pick Zoroark, its existence on your team makes things harder on your opponent. A disguise could show up at any time, but since not every Pokemon comes to any given battle, your opponent has to be wary for most of the fight. Of course, it's entirely possible that Zoroark debuting at the same time as Team Preview was on purpose. It could have been a balancing thing, to make sure it doesn't cause too much trouble. Who knows? Things started going downhill for Zoroark in Generation 6. In Gen 5, the Dark type had 2 weaknesses, Bug and Fighting. But in Gen 6, the Fairy type was added, and it was super effective against Dark as well. With several Fairy types making their home in UU, and power creep in the form of Mega Evolutions, Zoroark fell to the next tier down, rarely used, or RU for short. But it proved to be too strong for RU to handle, so it was banned. Zoroark got sent to the RU ban list, which is basically purgatory. It meant it wasn't allowed in RU, but it wasn't used often enough in UU to move up to the next tier. It was a strong Pokemon, but it wasn't able to muscle itself back up into the world of UU, since there were better Dark types like Hydreigon and Mega Houndoom. And Illusion remained a disappointingly limited ability, so that wasn't doing it any favors either. And it remained in ban list limbo for 2 generations, before falling all the way down to the 5th tier PU in Gen 8. PU doesn't stand for anything, by the way, but Zoroark was banned from PU as well. It did find a niche in RU, thanks to a brand new item, Heavy Duty Boots. It makes the holder immune to entry hazards, so they're most commonly used on Pokemon that are weak to Stealth Rock, like Volcarona and Charizard. Zoroark isn't weak to rocks, but by wearing boots, you remove one method for your opponent to tell if you're an illusion, since the amount of hazard damage it takes was one way of doing that. When you combine that with weather being less common in modern Pokemon, it was harder to figure out whether you're facing an illusion or not. Generation 8 introduced a new regional form of Zoroark, a normal ghost type from Hisui. Normal Ghost is a fantastic type combination, because it has 3 immunities, only 1 weakness, and nearly perfect neutral coverage. The only Pokemon Hisuian Zoroark can't hit for neutral damage, at least with its stab moves, are Kingambit, Tyranitar, and itself. It also has Illusion, so it could try and do similar shenanigans to its Unovan cousin. Hisuian Zoroark also had an edge in the stat department. Compared to Unovan Zoroark, it loses 5 points in HP and attack, but it gains 5 special attack and speed to compensate. Being stronger and faster means it can outspeed and KO opponents more easily. Having 2 stab types instead of 1 also helps it deal more damage overall. The combination of Hyper Voice and Shadow Ball is fantastic, because only 6 Pokemon resist them both. But the Kingambit line and Tyranitar get obliterated by a 4 times effective Focus Blast. At the end of the day though, Hisuian Zoroark suffers from the same kinds of problems as the Unovan one. It's even frailer than the OG Zoroark, because its HP stat is 55 instead of 60. Normal Ghost is good defensive typing, but when your defensive stats are so low, your typing only does so much to alleviate that. The immunities are nice, but it takes neutral damage from nearly everything else. And once again, Team Preview exists, so your opponent will know if there's a Zoroark lurking around the corner, and they're gonna know which one it is too. Nearly every competitive format, official and unofficial, has a rule called Species Clause, stating that you can't use 2 of the same Pokemon on your team. So I wouldn't be allowed to bring, say, 2 Palpitoad to a battle. And that goes for forms of the same Pokemon too, since they share the same number in the Pokedex. So I can't use 2 different Rotom appliances on the same team, and I can't use 2 different regional forms. In a world where Species Clause didn't exist,
In a world where Species Clause didn't exist,
I think it would be fun to mess around with a team that had both Zoroark forms on it. Until one of their illusions gets broken, this Virizion could be what we think it is, but it could also be either form of Zoroark. All 3 Pokemon have different sets of weaknesses, so your opponent would have a hard time guessing what they should do. If you go for a fighting type move guessing it's Unovan Zoroark, then it turns out to be the Hisuian one, it won't take any damage. If you go for a dark type move thinking it's Hisuian Zoroark, and you end up being wrong, both other possibilities resist the move. Zoroark isn't a bad Pokemon by any means, but it was released at an unfortunate time. It would be a lot harder to play around without Team Preview, because you would never know when it could pop up. Even if Zoroark wasn't on your team, your opponent will still have to keep it in mind. But in the right environment with the right teammates, Zoroark can still be a force to be reckoned with. Well, that's all I got for today. Leave a comment if there's any other Pokemon you want to see me talk about. I'll see you all next time. Good night, fellas. Sleep well.